Taki, 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 taki. That is the sound of one of the probably scariest of Japanese urban myths. Taki taki is her name. It is typical for the Japanese to give one of the scariest horror creatures such a misleading, stupid-sounding name. I would understand the horror of the creature as well, anyone on account of the fact that I ran into her. Like a typical American skeptic, I didn't take the Japanese folklore with much heed. After all, every story seemed to have the same moral: don't go out after dark. Therefore, it was only natural to believe that the stories were only system of keeping kids from wandering off. When one story was proved wrong or ignored, another and more exotic one was made up to keep the children enveloped in pants wetting fear of wandering off. The stories range from that of a slit-mouthed woman to the impossibility of the 50-story skeleton that would gladly tear off your head and drink your blood from your system like you were a juice box. There were always holes in the story. Such as how, in the world, a 50-story skeleton hasn't been spotted by more than one person at a time, or even that something that massive could ever sneak up on anyone. And even the story of the slit-mouthed woman had its problems. The story supposedly features a beautiful Japanese woman who angered her husband, who in turn sliced her mouth in rage. Now she goes around with a scarf over her mouth asking people if she's beautiful or not. If you say no, she takes a giant pair of shears to you. If you say yes, she takes off her scarf and asks you the same question again. At that point, you're pretty much screwed no matter what you say, unless you tell her she's so-so. And then you make her run for it while she's still contemplating what to do with that statement. However, it is never mentioned what happens if you see a giant pair of scissors on her back, and just make her run for it before she asks you anything. And if you happen to be armed, and shoot the girl in the head at point-blank range the moment she takes off her scarf. The story of Taki Taki is similar in many ways of plot holes. The story is about a girl who jumps into a subway and gets split in half. However, she didn't get pulverized completely, is anyone's guess. Afterward, her spirit gets royally ticked off at the world and chases down any poor sap she sees and cuts them in half. Her name is based off the noise she makes as she runs her long-nailed hands clack against the ground rapidly. Taki, 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 taki. Even if dead spirits were able to interact with the real world, my question is, why is Taki so angry? I've seen plenty of people who had lost their legs in reality shows or whatever, and they seem pretty happy. And her tripping and falling into a railway station hasn't anyone's fault besides her own. Therefore, the myths seem to contradict a rational human mindset. At least I thought, until I saw her torso sitting on a wall late one Friday evening. In a classic horror story fashion, it was incredibly dark, and I was walking home alone. Like I mentioned earlier, I didn't take much time of the surrounding folklore seriously. I actually thought it was a full-size girl for the longest time. If I had known that she was the ultimate concentration of horrific, mutilating nightmare fuel, I probably wouldn't have approached her so carefully to ask if she was alright. However, my good intentions changed to a furious rush of terror when she jerked violently at the sound of my voice and hopped off the wall. Before she even hit the ground, I clearly saw the most of the bottom portion of her was missing. She scurried toward me like an angered spider, making indistinguishable groaning and shrieking noises as she raced toward me. That's when I took off like a scared puppy. Who wouldn't? I'm a very fast runner. An undeniable fact been mentioned several times to me by my peers ever since middle school. I would have stopped running after the first few minutes if I had managed to leave whatever was chasing behind me. But the noise did not subside. In fact, as I ran, it grew steadily louder. Taki, 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 taki. The possibility of being an insanely well-configured prank had crossed my mind several times. I had asked for this elaborate joke The moment I bragged to all my friends that ghost stories didn't scare me or that I didn't believe in ghosts. However, the way the creature moved and how fast it went, and how impossible it is to pull off something like this without Hollywood effects or circus creatures, I really had little to believe except the fact that Taki happened to be the main character of an all-true story. But during my rambling and strangely calm train of thought, I noticed something. I got my feet to finally stop and listen. The clicking noises stopped. A gust of wind swirled around the corners of an alley and wrapped around my feet. Suddenly, a bolt of movement shot past the corner of my eye. Taki. I turned around as a strange spurt of horrendous clicking. However, the moment I focused my ears and to find out where the specter had run to, the clicking quit. I listened to what now a dead and ominous silence. The type of quiet that you'd play in horror movies before some corpse fell out of the ceiling, with his eyes sliced out of the sockets and the mouth hanging open in a ghastly scream. Taki. I turned my back at the spur of the sounds again, my heart beating so hard I felt I was going to go unconscious. I should get out of here, I thought to myself. That was perhaps a bad idea on the account that probable inability to watch my own back mindless dashing would swerve. However, my body instantly obeyed and I took off. As I rounded the corner, I stopped by the short and legless figure of Taki who stood on her hands, no more than a few feet away from me. My heart leapt, slamming into my throat and expelling a gag. The sound of my gag, Taki looked into my eyes. In the light of the street lamp, I actually got a glimpse of her face. By means of symmetrical features and a well-shaped nose, she was actually a very lovely girl. However, in sheer panic of the situation, made her beauty very little to me. But the scariest thing was, when I gagged, I swear the pupil of her eyes grew until the whites disappeared from her sockets when she turned and faced me. She raced at me while I attempted to start running again, and lurched like a fierce predator towards the lower torso with both hands outstretched. It was unreal how far she was able to jump. I screamed and swatted as best as I could to the side. I very well managed not to get cut in half, but her claw made a large gash in the side of my pelvis. I yelled as the blood began to pour out of my side, and in a terribly unintelligent motion, I flopped onto the ground, onto my back as I bled. By the time Taki had shaken off my blow, she leapt onto my back and laid there. It was at that point I switched from mildly intelligent survivalist to mindless panicked child. I shrieked and twisted violently to shake her off. Most of what happened during the time was a blur. A bunch of pain slashes of claws and blood till my face was blinded by red. It was almost a surreal nightmare. It was a surreal nightmare. Every feeling of panic and terror that you'd feel when being attacked by an angry dog was multiplied by the fact that this was an unhappy and vengeful creature. It was less than a dog, but much more frightening. I must have blacked out, because suddenly I came to my senses in a railway station. Everything was still blackened, horrendously dark, and I was able to see my hands and a few faint glows of shattered advertising signs. I was unable to recall how I got to the railway station in the first place. I could have crawled here in my wounded state or Taki could have dragged me here. However, my memory at that point was fuzzy and unreliable. I checked behind my back, and my spine crunched as my torso turned a full 180 degrees when I looked behind me. It didn't hurt, but it produced a strange feeling of relief, like a popping in your back in a violent manner. I didn't mean to turn myself around in such a grotesque manner, but it didn't terrify me as much as I suspect it would. When I straightened myself, another abnormal crunch. I examined myself, unintentionally reminded myself of the gash that laid upon my side by Tiki Tiki. Now I was able to view the thing in full potential. It was a cut all the way down from my front to back in a clean slice. However, no blood poured from the wound. That was the final revelation that I needed to know why I had been left alone. I'm dead, I thought to myself, still far shaken to break the silence of the railway station by verbalizing my thoughts. The horror quite at that time, for the revelation that death wasn't quite as terrible as I thought it was, but it was sinking in slowly. However, I was quickly distracted by the sight of a young woman walking down a far more well-lit path from me. Noticing my huge form standing stiffly in the shadows, I was overwhelmed with a feeling that it was my inner purpose to hurt her. I moved towards the girl, my spine moving unnaturally and my torso twisting on and off my pelvis, the upper part of my body half holding on.